Hey everybody, welcome back to Football Talk with Vinny. In today's video, we're going to go over the big trade for Russell Wilson. Now, because of me being lazy as shit, by the time this video comes out, probably be a couple days after, so everyone already know. But just in case you live under a rock and you are not really aware, Russell Wilson got traded to the Denver Broncos. Now, the exact trade was Denver sent over Drew Lock, Noah Fant, Shelby Harris, a first-round pick in 2022, which is the 9th pick overall, a first-round pick in 2023, also sent a second-round pick in this year's draft, number 40 overall, a second-round pick in next year's draft in 2023, and also a 5th-round pick in 2022, And in return, they got back Russell Wilson and a 4th-rounder in 2022. Right now, at first initial reactions, I think of most people is this absolutely catapults Denver into the actual discussion for Super Bowl contenders. With how good Denver has played on the defensive side of the ball, they have a lot of pieces on the offensive side. A lot of people feel like they were just a quarterback away. So that's obviously very big news for the Denver Broncos and Broncos fans. Now, obviously, a lot has been made. You play in a tough division, right? So, there is a chance that they could miss the playoffs, which is entirely true. But again, if you are a fan of the Denver Broncos or just any team in general, and you are weak at the quarterback spot, whenever you get an upgrade like Russell Wilson, you have to feel good. Look at what the Rams did last year, right? They made the trade for Matthew Stafford, and I told everyone that, hey, he's not a stat patter, right? He obviously is a very good quarterback, just played in a bad team. Now, obviously, Seattle hasn't been as bad as Detroit, but over the last couple of years, Seattle as a roster has gotten kind of progressively worse over the last 3-4 years, and you've seen it in their win total. Obviously, we'll start with the Denver Broncos side of it, right? Giving up Shelby Harris, Noah Fant, Drew Lock, couple first-round picks, couple second-round picks, right? Essentially, Noah Fant was a first-round pick, Drew Lock was second, right? So you really gave up 3 1s, 3 2s, right? Shelby Harris, and a 5th for Russell Wilson. And obviously that kind of sparks a debate of what should you give up for a franchise quarterback, right? I personally think that they probably should have, if I was Seattle at least, I would have wanted more. But I guess it's kind of difficult because you did get the first 2 picks in not only this year's draft, but next year's draft. And I think a lot of teams don't want to go into the 3rd and 4th year of draft picks because, especially in the NFL, right, coaches get fired within a year or 2, right? So a lot of coaches don't like to look more than 2-3 years down the road because you just don't know what your team is going to look like. You don't even know if you're going to be there in 2 to 3 years, just the way how things change so quickly in the NFL. So again, from Denver's perspective, it's a win really all the way around the board. You got rid of a quarterback that you weren't really sure if he was even going to be your starter, right? The tight end loss kind of hurts a bit, but there are guys in free agency or maybe just through the draft that you can replace him. His production wasn't so great where it's like, wow, it's going to be very difficult to replicate that production. Now, again, from Seattle's perspective, I think a lot of people really haven't gone over Seattle's side of it. I think other than Pete Carroll, I don't really mind the move from Seattle's perspective. Now, the reason why I say other than Pete Carroll is because he is, I want to say 71, 72 years old. So obviously he doesn't look it, but with being, 71, 72 years old, how much longer is he realistically going to coach, right? When you obviously decide to trade him, you are in a rebuild at this point, right? And it could take 2 to 3 years to rebuild it back up into an actual good team and a good roster. Now, is Pete Carroll going to want to be coaching in 2 to 3 years? But again, as far as the GM is concerned, the owner and the roster itself, I kind of like the move. Not necessarily that I like trading a, future Hall of Fame quarterback, or at least potentially Hall of Fame quarterback, but it's just the situation you're in. Your team wasn't great. You didn't have a lot of cap space. It was going to be very difficult to improve the roster more than you could have already. You didn't have any draft picks, at least your own first-round pick, because you traded it for the Jamal Adams deal. So it was going to be very difficult to improve the roster. Now, obviously, it's never an easy decision to go to a full-blown rebuild, and I think trading a superstar quarterback kind of hits the reset button. But when you think of it, I guess the alternative is you just kind of retool and then you hope that in a year or 2 or 3, you can rebuild a competitive enough team to where you can compete for Super Bowls, right? Kind of like what the Saints did, right? In 2009, they won the Super Bowl, but over the course of the next 3 to 5 years, they got progressively worse, excuse me. It's just because the roster got older, right? You couldn't pay those players because the production wasn't there. And then you had a couple year period in 2015-ish, around there, where the Saints were like just kind of teetering at like that 500 mark. They were 6-10, 7-9, 8-8. They just couldn't get back to the playoffs, but because you had Drew Brees, you were winning a bunch of games and you were never bottoming out and being a really bad team, right? And then all of a sudden they had the one draft where you got a bunch of Pro Bowl caliber. You got the one draft where you drafted a bunch of Pro Bowl players and you rebuilt the roster pretty quickly, and then you were able to compete for Super Bowls in Drew Brees' last couple of years. Sure, they didn't get to any and didn't win any, but you were able to compete for some. So obviously, if you keep Russell Wilson, that would be the goal, right? Is in the next 2 to 3 years, you rebuild the roster, and then, you know, Russell Wilson's last 3 to 5 years, you hopefully have another crack at winning a Super Bowl. Whereas, you know, if you've been watching the NFL as long as I have been watching it, you understand that teams, if you make the right decisions through free agency and trades, you can change your roster overnight, and within a 1 to 2 year span, you could be a completely different team. Just look at the Cincinnati Bengals. They went from 2 years ago being, I think it was a 1-15 or 2-14 team, to being in the Super Bowl, right? And there was only a couple moves that were really made that kind of changed the direction of the franchise. So that can happen for you. So let me quickly go over some of the cap numbers, because I know that's probably a big reason why you guys watch this show. So for the Denver side, Russell Wilson's only going to account for $24 million on the cap, and this is because all of his signing bonus is actually paid by the team that traded him. So they will absorb all of the signing bonus money, and the new team just absorbs all of the actual salary for the current season and the remaining seasons. With that being said, the Denver Broncos still have $23.5 million to spend on players, so you can go out in free agency and you can sign an offensive lineman, maybe a guy like Terron Armstead from the New Orleans Saints, or if you decide to go inside, maybe a guy like Brandon Scherff from the Washington Commanders. Also, I do think some viable options, obviously Von Miller, he had tweeted a picture of himself back in his old jersey, right? And also I think another interesting option would be maybe if you can get a guy like Von Miller, maybe get Odell Beckham to sign with you as well. Because again, if you are the Denver Broncos and you're trying to make a push now that you got Russell Wilson, you can bring in a guy like Odell Beckham, who is unfortunately coming off an injury, so he probably won't get a big deal. If you can get Von Miller and Odell Beckham, you essentially are replacing Noah Fant with Odell Beckham, which is probably an upgrade at that point, and you get Von Miller back to add to the defensive line, in which you lost Shelby Harris, so again, probably an upgrade. And again, I don't think both of those players combined will take up $23.5 million of your cap space, so you probably realistically could sign both of those players. Now again, let's say you decide not to go with OBJ, and you decide to sign one of the guards or the tackles. Again, you could probably sign a guard and Von Miller and be under the $23.5 million. So you bring those two players in, you upgrade A, the offensive line, and also B, the defensive line. And again, you already have a very good defense. We know the offense has talent around it, and now upgrading the quarterback position, you could definitely see them making a Super Bowl run. The Seattle perspective, they are actually going to pay $26 million in dead cap space just for trading away Russell Wilson. So they take on a pretty hefty number for this year. The rest of the contracts are all pretty reasonable. You got Shelby Harris at $8 million, you got Noah Fant at $2.2, and Drew Lock at $1.4. A decision does have to be made on Noah Fant on his 5th-year option. If you were to exercise that, you'd be paying him a $6.85 million salary for next year. So again, I think that's pretty reasonable for the tight end position, so you probably pick that up if you're the Seattle Seahawks. Also, next year, when not only Russell Wilson, but the rest of the dead cap space that they're paying, when those players come off the books, all the salaries cap space that they're going to save from not having Russell Wilson on the books, they're going to have a estimated $142 million next year of salary cap space. I think it was the number 1 or number 2 in the league in terms of projected cap space. Now, obviously, if you're the Seahawks and you sign some guys this free agency, that will lower the number, but still, they are going to have an extreme amount of cap space come next offseason. And again, it's just time for a full-blown rebuild, right? You let go of Bobby Wagner, right? I think the Jamal Adams trade looks really bad now because you're in a full-blown rebuild, but you gave up 2 first-round picks for a safety that, although he's a very good player, like, he's essentially going to be on a rebuilding roster. I mean, maybe you look to trade him, you know, and then that begs the question, are you going to be looking to trade other pieces like DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett? DK is a lot younger of a player, so maybe you keep him and you just say, all right, in 2 to 3 years, he'll be in his physical prime along with the rest of the team if we can build it correctly. Maybe a guy like Tyler Lockett, you don't want to wait 2 to 3 years, because by the time that window comes, he may be an aging player. Now, obviously, again, before I end the video, with any trade, it's really just going to come down, if you're Seattle, to who do you draft with the picks that you got from Russell Wilson, right? If you draft busts and they don't work out, it will be terrible because A, you won't have the good quarterback, but also you won't be upgrading the roster like you thought you were going to with the draft capital that you received. Now, if you hit on some of these picks and they're very good players, right, you could see obviously Denver in the short term, the next, 2 to 5 years, they could have a very good roster for the near future. And then you're talking 3 to 5 years in the future, the Seattle Seahawks could rebuild a roster that could be one of the most talented rosters, right, with all the extra picks that they're getting, the cap space they're going to have, right? And if they're able to do it correctly and hit on player after player after player, you could say to yourself, Seattle looks like a very good team, right? And then, what analysts do all the time, right? The teams in the playoffs, you'll go over the list of guys on their roster, and then it'll be a big, kind of talking point where you say, look at all these guys that they picked up due to the Russell Wilson trade. So you think it worked out good for both teams. Now, again, if they don't hit on their picks, or if they don't trade their picks for established players that turn out to be good, then it'll look like a complete, absolute botch of this whole deal by trading Russell Wilson. Obviously, that's going to be really the end of the video. Just one quick point. Obviously, the Aaron Rodgers thing. You're a Broncos fan. You thought you were going to get Aaron Rodgers, and then it goes to Russell Wilson. Again, from Green Bay's perspective, right, there was no report on the deal. There was a report, but then Pat McAfee said there's no deal in place. But obviously, Aaron Rodgers going back to Green Bay obviously is huge. You franchise tag Devontae Adams, and again, you're essentially just going to run it back again. And I guess at this point, if I am the Green Bay Packers organization, I would probably look to extend Aaron Rodgers and probably trade Jordan Love. It would be very difficult to keep him on the roster. Again, he's going to be going into his 3rd season now. So again, at that point, if Aaron Rodgers plays another year or 2, you're going to have no real film on him, and you're going to have to either A, give him a big deal or give him a 5th-year option. Whereas if you just trade him this year, let's just say for a high 2nd-round pick or maybe a late 1st, you can use that pick to draft a player that will actually help your organization. Or, maybe if you get a 2nd-round pick, you turn that 2nd-round pick into another project quarterback. But at least it won't be talked about as much, because if you don't take a quarterback in the 1st round, it usually just isn't. So again, so sorry for getting the video out so late. I appreciate you guys for watching. And again, I look forward to updating everybody on once free agency actually starts, which I believe I want to say is like the 14th. I want to say on Monday or Tuesday is like the start of the negotiating period for like 1 to 2 days. And then the official guys that, reported that they're going to sign, then they're able to actually ink the deals. So we are obviously very close. Obviously, I'll make another video when that time comes. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I look forward to the next video. Bye.